Hey, 42 here. Sometime in the mid-17th century, an unknown miner made the discovery of a lifetime. Buried in a kimberlite deposit in the Collioure mine in eastern India was a truly remarkable diamond. It was incredibly large and of almost perfect clarity. But what really stood out was its colour, a deep, piercing blue. In the more than 3.5 centuries since that discovery, this rare blue diamond has become by far the most famous gemstone on planet Earth. It has been worn by kings, celebrities, thieves, aristocrats, and at least one dog. It has been bought, sold, stolen, smuggled, and recut. And it even provided the inspiration for the most famous fictional diamond in history, the Heart of the Ocean from James Cameron's Titanic. All of that is pretty impressive, and I haven't even gotten to the thing that the diamond is most famous for yet. That would be the curse. Now I know what you're thinking, a cursed gemstone? Really? Many of the diamond's owners were similarly skeptical. At first. Most didn't stay that way for long. Some died in strange or brutal circumstances. Others faced financial ruin, and at least one went insane. There were beheadings, bankruptcies, drownings, a suspected suicide, and much, much more. There's also the small fact that the diamond glows in the dark. Glows red in the dark. Now, I'm not a superstitious man, but if that doesn't scream cursed gemstone, then I don't know what does. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To tell this incredible story properly, we're going to have to start from the beginning. So, put on your best white gloves and fire up your faceting machines, because this is the story of the single most famous gemstone on Earth. This is the story of the Hope Diamond. Now, I've always been really interested in learning about the journey my ancestors took. MyHeritage is the #1 family history service in Europe. I received one of their easy at-home DNA testing kits. It only took a few minutes to collect a saliva sample and send it off in the post. Now, I really wasn't sure exactly what I'd see from the results, but I knew I did have some Irish ancestry, so I was really intrigued to see if that popped up. And whilst I waited for my results, I even used their website to enhance and colorize some of my old family photos. Let's do it. Oh, this is good. I kind of guessed some of that. The Iberian bit, that surprised me. That's really cool. Let's have a look at my full ethnicity estimate. French settlers in Canada from the UK. Ethnicity English, but genetic group Northwestern England. No great surprise there. Have a look at my DNA matches. DNA matches are your relatives, many of whom you've never met or heard of before. MyHeritage compares your DNA with that of millions of other members and identifies shared DNA segments that were potentially inherited from a common ancestor. So this is really interesting. It's found 19,000 DNA matches. MyHeritage has a promotion right now. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code and use coupon code 42 for free shipping. And as an added bonus, you can start a 30-day free trial of MyHeritage's best subscription for family history research. Don't miss out, and a big thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Our tale begins in 1666 AD, not long after the city of London was burnt to ashes in the Great Fire. Well, if we're going to get technical, our tale really begins in the year 1,100,000,000 BC. That's when the Hope Diamond formed deep in the bowels of the Earth. It is older than humanity, older than the dinosaurs, older even than complex life. This thing formed before animals, like all of them. But to be honest with you, not a lot happened for the first 99.9999675% of the diamond's existence. So for the purposes of this video, let's just skip ahead to the good bit. Now, where was I? Oh yes, in 1666, not long after the City of London was burnt to ashes in the Great Fire, a flamboyant French gem merchant by the name of Jean-Baptiste Tavernier acquired a gigantic blue diamond whilst travelling in India. It's generally thought that he bought this rare stone with cold hard cash, but according to one story, which in truth is probably more of a legend, he stole it from its setting in the eye of a Hindu statue, possibly triggering this whole nasty curse business. Weighing in at 115 carats and sparkling with a piercing blue light, Tavernier's diamond was something truly remarkable. Even today, 3.5 centuries later, it remains one of the largest blue diamonds ever found. Not only was the diamond freakishly large and of seriously uncommon colour, it also possessed a very unusual property. When exposed to ultraviolet light, the diamond emitted an intense glow that lasted for several minutes. Many diamonds either fluoresce or phosphoresce under ultraviolet light, but not quite like this one. Blue diamonds typically glow a kind of bluish white, but Tavernier's stone glowed a deep red. These days we know that's thanks to trace amounts of nitrogen and boron, but at the time, it was spooky to say the least. Anyway, once back in France, Tavernier set about trying to find a buyer for his prized new asset, and he didn't have to look for long. This was a gemstone fit for a king, so that's exactly where Tavernier took it. King Louis XIV, no relation to the orangutan, is one of the most famous monarchs of all time. He's also the longest serving, having sat on the throne for an astonishing 72 years and 110 days. Known for enjoying the finer things in life, an absurdly enormous blue diamond was right up Louis' alley. So he bought it from Tavernier for the princely, or should that be kingly, sum of 220,000 livres, equal in value to 147 kilograms of solid gold bullion. Today, that would be worth about $12 million. That's a serious chunk of change, but Tavernier's blue diamond was so special that King Louis threw in a little something extra to sweeten the deal. He made Tavernier a nobleman. Despite the colossal sum he paid for the diamond, Louis XIV wasn't entirely happy with his purchase. The stone had originally been cut in India, where jewelers prioritized size over everything else when faceting gemstones. That's why the Tavernier blue, as it's typically known, was such an unusual shape by modern standards. European tastes were very different, focusing on brilliance, basically how sparkly a gemstone appears, even if that meant losing a significant amount of the original material. So, the king had his new diamond recut, a process that took a full 2 years and yielded a 69-carat heart-shaped diamond known officially as the Blue Diamond of the Crown of France, and unofficially as the French Blue. Apparently the curse hadn't really warmed up yet, because the diamond would remain in Louis' possession for almost 50 years, during which time he reportedly wore it as the world's most extravagant cravat pin. Thanks to his remarkably long reign and some bad luck with illness in the royal bloodline, marrying your double first cousin will do that, I guess, Louis XIV was succeeded not by his son, or even his grandson, but by his great-grandson Louis XV. Being just 5 years old when he became king, the 15th Louis was more interested in making fart noises with his armpits than messing around with boring gold diamonds, I assume. But apparently that changed when he hit his mid-30s, because that's when he had the French blue removed from great-granddad's old-fashioned cravat pin and reset into a fancy new ceremonial pendant for a Catholic chivalric order known as the Order of the Golden Fleece. Like his great-grandfather before him, Louis XV ruled for a stupendously long time, 59 years in his case, and it wasn't until 1774 that he was succeeded by his nephew, Louis XVI. Imaginative bunch, weren't they? Now, if you know your European history, you'll know that Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were the last French monarchs before the Revolution. Now, I'll admit we haven't heard all too much about this supposed curse just yet, but that's about to change, because things did not end well for the last rulers of pre-revolutionary France. Louis XVI was arrested by the revolutionaries on the 13th of August 1792, accused of high treason. The crown jewels, including the Order of the Golden Fleece, were confiscated and kept in the former royal storehouse. Considering their immense value, they were guarded around the clock. But there was one small issue with security. 2 guards were stationed outside the storage room at all times, but neither of them actually had a key to the door that they were guarding. If an enterprising thief was able to gain access to the room undetected, nobody would be any the wiser that anything went missing. And on the 11th of September 1792, that's exactly what happened. If you're picturing some kind of elaborate tunnel system or secret passageway, you're overthinking it. The thieves simply waited for nightfall, then climbed in through an unbarred window round the back. They were then free to help themselves to some of the most valuable jewellery on the planet. It was like taking candy from an incredibly rich baby. That first night, the thieves were cautious, getting in and out as quickly as possible. But the next day, it became clear that nobody had actually noticed what had happened. So the thieves came back the next night, and the one after that, and the one after that. By the 5th night, it's thought that at least 50 people broke into the storehouse to help themselves to the accumulated riches of the axed ancient regime. And apparently, they finally made enough commotion that someone figured out what was going on in there. But by that time, it was far too late. The French crown jewels were gone. The majority of the gems were tracked down over the following weeks and months, but not the Order of the Golden Fleece, nor the giant blue diamond that it held. It had simply vanished, and never to be seen again. Or at least that's what people thought. But it turned out that the missing blue diamond of the French crown jewels hadn't been lost at all. If you've been wondering why I haven't actually mentioned anything called the Hope Diamond yet, everything is about to start making sense. A couple of decades after the theft of the French crown jewels, a mysterious blue diamond of considerable size turned up in the possession of a London jeweller called Daniel Eilison. Weighing in at 44 carats, it was smaller than the French blue and cut in a different style. That made it a different diamond, right? Well, not necessarily. Exactly where this impressive stone had come from wasn't entirely clear, and there was something very interesting about the timing of its appearance. You see, it turns out that the statute of limitations for the theft of the French crown jewels stood at 20 years. That meant that after exactly 20 years had passed, the thieves would no longer be punishable for their crime under French law. So, have a guess as to when Daniel Eilison's mysterious blue diamond first appeared on history's radar. Yeah, it was exactly 20 years and 2 days after the theft of the French crown jewels. Coincidence? Nope. In 2005, researchers working at the Smithsonian Museum were finally able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Eilison's diamond was indeed the French blue, recut to a smaller size by persons unknown to disguise its origins. But interestingly enough, back then, nobody actually realised. At first, that might sound strange. Blue diamonds of this size and quality are stunningly rare, even today. The fact that one appeared out of thin air just 20 years after the most famous blue diamond in the world was stolen should surely have raised a few eyebrows, right? Today, the theft of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of royal jewels would be front-page news around the world. But this was the early 19th century. Global news hadn't been invented yet. It's also possible that the French deliberately kept the whole thing quiet to avoid embarrassment. Even people working in the industry might not have been aware of the theft. So, on the 13th of September 1812, the recut French blue quietly re-entered circulation. Even in its new, slightly smaller form, it was still a gem, fit for a king. And rumour has it its next owner was another one, George IV. I say rumour has it because the diamond never actually appeared in any official royal documents, so we don't know for sure. But several sources strongly imply that George Porgy did indeed acquire it for his personal collection. It would fit with what we know about him too. Even for his own time, he was famous for his flamboyant tastes and hedonistic lifestyle. A bright blue diamond the size of a pigeon's egg was definitely on brand. George IV died in 1830, and we don't know for certain exactly what happened to the diamond, if indeed he did ever actually own it. According to one theory, it was quietly sold to pay off the king's many debts. But some historians believe it may have been stolen by his mistress, Lady Conyngham. Either way, the whereabouts of the diamond are a little unclear until 1839, when it appeared in the possession of a phenomenally wealthy gem collector called Henry Hope. Henry Hope was one of 3 heirs to the legendary Dutch banking dynasty known as Hope & Co., bank of choice for the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte, Frederick the Great, and the richest company in history, the Dutch East India Company. He bought the diamond for a reported $60,000, the equivalent of about $2 million in today's money. For the next 60 years or so, it stayed in the family, becoming so synonymous with the Hopes that it took their name. In return, the diamond seems to have given the Hopes nothing but misery and misfortune. Henry Hope died just a year after buying the diamond, and his untimely demise sparked a major inheritance row amongst his 3 nephews. In the end, the Hope diamond went to the eldest nephew. Yet another Henry Hope. Posh people really are lazy when it comes to names, aren't they? Henry Hope 2.0 was the first to show the Hope diamond in public, loaning it out to various prestigious events, including the London World Fair of 1851 and the Paris World Fair that took place 4 years later. In a strange twist of fate, the Paris World Fair was held in the purpose-built Palais de l'Industrie, meaning the Hope diamond was on display just 600 meters or so from the royal storehouse from where it was stolen 60 years earlier. Not that anybody realized it at the time. Henry Hope, the second one, died in 1862, and the diamond passed first to his wife and then their grandson. Have a guess what his name was? Yeah, another one. Thankfully, this particular Henry Hope 3.0 was known by one of his middle names, Francis. Like many owners of the Hope diamond before him, Francis lived an extremely extravagant lifestyle. He gambled, he drank, and when he was good and drunk, he gambled some more. That always ends well, right? In 1894, he filled in the final square on his Playboy aristocrat bingo card when he found himself a scandalous showgirl to marry, Mary Yoher. The famous curse of the Hope diamond may have been a bit slow getting going with the French Louis, but now that it was good and warmed up proper, it started cursing the living crap out of everyone it touched. Francis and Mary had about as much self-restraint with money as I have with a half-finished bag of Haribo Star Mix. And within 2 years of getting married, Francis was forced to file for bankruptcy. Not long after that, Mary left him for a younger, better-looking man. Mary likely first wore the Hope diamond in the 1890s. Back then, she was a successful showgirl, famous on both sides of the Atlantic. But her life after that point was nothing short of a disaster. Her career tanked to the point where she couldn't even get work as a clerical assistant, let alone an actress. She married 3 times, divorced twice, and her third husband tried to commit suicide. And in 1938, she died in abject poverty. It was a spectacular reversal of fortunes, to say the least. It might sound a bit far-fetched to suggest the diamond had anything to do with any of it, but that's not how Mary herself saw things. In fact, in later life, she co-wrote a series of short films which basically blamed every single one of her various misfortunes on the cursed diamond. Perhaps rather fittingly, they bombed. Francis's financial troubles got so bad that he was forced to sell 2 entire country estates and the Hope diamond to pay off his debts. The diamond went to a London jewel merchant called Adolph Wheel. who bought it in 1901 for about $140,000, about $5.2 million in today's money. Veal didn't hang on to the diamond for long, smart guy. Instead, he sold it to New York diamond dealer Simon Frankel of Frankel & Sons, making a tidy profit in the process. According to one source, Veal got $250,000 in the sale, close to twice what he paid for it, less than a year earlier. Frankel took the diamonds to the States with plans to sell it in New York, but he wasn't immediately able to find a buyer. To begin with, he was happy to sit tight, safe in the knowledge that his extremely shiny new asset was only likely to appreciate in value over time. But then, according to some, the curse really kicked in. In 1907, the US diamond market nosedived, and the formerly successful Frankel & Sons found itself on the verge of bankruptcy. In the end, Simon was forced to sell the diamond at a significant loss in 1908. The buyer was a semi-mysterious gem collector called Selim Habib, who is rumored to have been a representative of Abdul Hamid, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. A bit like George IV, we don't know for sure if the Sultan definitely owned the Hope diamond, but circumstantial evidence suggests that he probably did. It certainly checks out from the whole curse perspective as well. He was deposed in April 1909, just a year after Selim Habib supposedly bought the diamond on his behalf. Habib didn't fare too well either. According to an article in the New York Times, he drowned a year after obtaining the diamond when the ship he was traveling on sank near Singapore. The Hope diamond changed hands a few more times after that, before ending up in the inventory of a chap called Pierre Cartier, scion of the legendary Cartier family of jewelers. Pierre planned to sell the diamond in America. The question was, who to? As we've already seen, the Hope diamond was fit for a king, but the land of the free answered to no monarch. So Pierre instead focused on the American equivalent of royalty, celebrities. Edward Beale McLean, known to his buddies as Ned, was born to a family of publishing magnates. He inherited ownership of the Washington Post at the age of just 27, and he spent his entire life rubbing shoulders with the great and the good of American high society. His wife, Evelyn Walsh McLean, was a socialite with an unusual origin story. Born in fairly modest circumstances, her father, a miner, discovered a literal gold mine when he was just 12 years old, catapulting the family into uber wealth overnight. Ned and Evelyn married in 1908, instantly becoming one of the richest couples in America. But along with their wealth, they were also famous for their, shall we say, fiscal frivolity. Cartier had sold the McLeans another absurdly expensive diamond, the Star of the East, whilst they were on their honeymoon in Europe. Pierre had a well-earned reputation as a master salesman. He knew the McLeans would be interested in the Hope diamond, and he also knew that he could likely squeeze a bit more cash out of them if he emphasized its incredible history. By this point, it was already widely believed that the Hope diamond was the very same stone owned by Louis XIV almost 200 years earlier. Pierre also decided to take a bit of a risk with his sales pitch by leaning into the whole curse thing. The McLeans were an adventurous, bold couple, and Pierre thought the rumours of a curse would add a dash of enticing danger to the deal. As usual, he was absolutely right. In 1911, the McLeans bought the Hope diamond for $180,000, about $6 million today. Interestingly, whilst the couple clearly found rumours of the curse alluring, it seems they were also at least a little bit nervous about the whole thing, because included in the contract of sale was a very unusual clause. If any fatality occurred in the McLean family within a year of purchasing the diamond, they would be permitted to return it to Cartier, no questions asked. The Hope diamond has been owned and worn by some of the most famous and influential people who ever lived. But none of them made it their own quite like Evelyn McLean did. It quickly became her signature piece. She wore it to grand social events and private dinner parties, as you might expect, but she also wore it around the house and in the family swimming pool. When she was feeling especially fancy, she dual-wielded, wearing both the Hope Diamond and the even larger Star of the East at the same time. And when she didn't feel fancy at all, she would stick a pair of kebab-stained jogging bottoms on and clip the Hope Diamond to the collar of her favourite dog, a Great Dane called Mike. If anyone in history was ever going to suffer the consequences of the Hope Diamond's supposed curse, it was Evelyn McLean. So, did any great tragedy befall her or her family during the 35 years or so that she owns the stone? Actually, yes. In 1909, the McLean's 9-year-old son, Winston, known in the press as the $100 million baby on account of his anticipated inheritance, died when he was hit by an automobile outside his family's country estate. The marriage between Ned and Evelyn was always a turbulent one on account of Ned's drinking and womanizing, and in 1931 the couple got divorced. Ned's behavior grew increasingly erratic over the following years, so much so that he was forced to sell the Washington Post by a board of trustees. He was eventually committed to an insane asylum, where he lived out the rest of his days until his death at the age of 51. In 1946, Ned and Evelyn's 24-year-old daughter, Evie, was found dead after apparently taking an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. I say apparently because 5 years earlier, she'd been married to Senator Robert Reynolds, a man exactly 3 times her age, who by that point was already on his 5th wife. Some people have speculated that the accidental overdose may not have been accidental after all. Evelyn McLean was understandably devastated by her daughter's death, and she too died of pneumonia just 7 months later. Rumour has it she was wearing the diamond when she passed away. So yeah, I'm not saying that the diamond was cursed, but it was totally cursed. Jokes aside, I know it sounds kind of ridiculous to attribute all of that misery to an inert diamond. But once again, the people who actually lived through it weren't so sure. We know that Evelyn was initially skeptical about the prospect of a curse, but in her memoir, Father Struck It Rich, published in 1936, she confessed to growing increasingly concerned that the curse might be real. We also know that in later life she was very careful never to let her friends or family touch the stone. When she died, most of Evelyn's possessions were auctioned to pay off her many debts. One thing that Hope Diamond owners seem to have had in common is that they were truly terrible with money. I guess that makes sense. You have to be a little fiscally irresponsible to spend the GDP of a small country on a piece of bling. Evelyn's gem collection was bought by legendary jeweler Harry Winston, known to some as the King of Diamonds, who made the Hope Diamond the centerpiece of his Court of Jewels, a traveling exhibition of some of the world's rarest and most valuable gemstones. By this point in our story, the Hope Diamond is almost certainly the most famous and valuable gemstone on the planet. But unlike the jewelers that came before him, so far as we know, Harry Winston never attempted to sell. In fact, he ultimately ended up giving it away for absolutely nothing. Winston was an astute businessman. He built a staggeringly successful jewelry empire from scratch, and it still survives to this day. But he was also a genuine lover of precious gems, and a very proud American. He believed that the USA should have a world-class gem collection, and what better way to start it than with the world's most famous diamond. So rather than sell the Hope Diamond to another uber-rich private collector, in 1958 he donated it to the Smithsonian Museum. Hard as it may be to believe, in a world where your Amazon delivery driver is about as likely to yeet your precious parcel over the back fence as he is to deliver it to your door, Winston posted the unfathomably expensive Hope Diamond by good old-fashioned registered mail at a cost of $2.44. And it's been on display at the Smithsonian Museum ever since. It is widely considered to be one of the most expensive museum pieces in the entire world. As for exactly how expensive it really is, it's hard to say for sure. You could easily argue that its unique combo of being a big fuck-off blue diamond with an almost comically rich history makes it literally priceless. but most estimates put its value somewhere in the region of 250 to 300 million US dollars. Speaking of millions of dollars, it's about time for the million-dollar question. Is the Hope Diamond really cursed? Well, curses aren't exactly the kinds of things you can study in a lab. So whether or not you believe in the curse is likely to come down to whether or not you believe in curses in the first place. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll probably already know how I feel about it. Is the Hope Diamond cursed? Nah. It's undeniable that plenty of bad things happened to the diamond's many owners over the years. But we're talking about 350 years of history here. As a great philosopher once said, shit happens. Given enough time, a certain amount of tragedy is sadly inevitable. There's also a fair amount of evidence that most of the talk of curses originated with the two people who stood to gain the most from it, Mary Yoher and Pierre Cartier. Mary wrote her film serial on the diamond's curse when her career was already in tatters, and she needed a miracle to get it back on track. Her association with the Hope Diamond was arguably the single thing that she was most famous for, so it makes sense that she tried to use it to her advantage. And we already know that Pierre Cartier used the curse as a sales tactic when negotiating with the McLeans. From there, it's likely that unscrupulous journalists picked up on the story and did what unscrupulous journalists always do. They made a bunch of random shit up to sell newspapers. As a result, the true story of the Hope Diamond was blown out of all proportions in the press, with dozens of people who likely never even owned it included on the ever-growing list of people supposedly affected by the curse. There are also several examples where people who really did own the diamond were assigned various terrible fates that never actually happened. For example, it's widely reported that Jean-Baptiste Taverner was torn apart by wild dogs not long after selling the diamond to Louis XIV, but it turns out that he actually died of natural causes in Moscow at the grand old age of 84. Then there's Salim Habib. I've already mentioned that the New York Times printed an article detailing how he drowned less than a year after acquiring the diamond, and it's true that a man called Salim Habib really did die on board that ship. It's just it wasn't the same Salim Habib who owned the Hope Diamond. Same name, different person. Then there's Simon Frankel. Again, it's true that his company, Frankel & Sons, got into financial difficulties not long after acquiring the stone at the turn of the 20th century. But then so did literally thousands of other companies. 1907 was the year of the so-called panic, where the US stock market fell by almost 50%. Ultimately, for those who believe in the curse, the story pretty much writes itself. They simply ignore the diamond's multiple owners who seem to have suffered no obvious ill effects from years or even decades of ownership. For example, the first two Louis. Instead, they focus on the inevitable tragedies that have occurred down the years, especially the multiple grenades that blew up in the lives of the McLeans. It's kind of mind-blowing just how many important people have owned this thing over the centuries. The story of the diamond may not be one of a 350-year-old curse, but it's still incredibly cool. Thanks for watching. MyHeritage has a promotion right now. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code and use coupon code 42 for free shipping. And as an added bonus, you can start a 30-day free trial of MyHeritage's best subscription for family history research. Don't miss out, and a big thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video.